Have a look at this minigame gameplay. If you've ever watched a few Five Nights at Freddy's Fury videos or played the games yourself, chances are you'd recognize this as Midnight Motorist, a minigame from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator or FNAF 6. But if you're a theorist like me or the countless other FNAF theorists out there who've also covered the subject before, you will recognize this as an incurable curse created by William Afton down in the 9th layer of Ultimate Custom Night, because this singular minigame is responsible for some of the biggest fallouts in the FNAF theorizing community, as well as being the only minigame to still leave us puzzled for the better part of a decade at this point. And even though we've recently received new information about this minigame, this game is still fundamentally unsolvable. But today, I'm here to explain why no one's been able to solve it, what we know about this cryptic minigame, and if maybe, just maybe, I will be the one to set the record straight. Again. But this time, I really think I've solved it. And trust me when I tell you, today's Midnight Motorist theory is nothing like anything you've heard before. First off, let's recap this minigame as well as what my previous theory on Midnight Motorist was about. In FNAF 6, if you buy the Midnight Motorist arcade machine and place it in your pizzeria, you can play through a simplistic racing game that has you avoiding other cars in oncoming traffic. However, on the foreflap of the game, if you stick to the bottom of the screen, the setting changes completely, presenting you with a minigame labeled Later That Night in FNAF 6's code. In this minigame, you play as a yellow man driving a purple car through a secluded forest. At one point, you can drive to the left to find a bar named Junior's or keep going forward. If you stop at the bar, a green man will stop you at the door saying,
"Come on, you know you can't be here. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be."
If you keep going down the road, you'll eventually drive up to a house, your house. If you enter it, you find a person sitting on a couch watching TV who will tell you to
leave him alone tonight. He had a rough day.
Further on in the house, there's a door. Yellow guy will bang on the door multiple times, shouting at the person outside to let him in, eventually deciding to go around through the outside. Once you do, you find a broken glass window, a pair of animatronic footprints, and a set of human ones leading away from your home.
"Run off to that place again. You'll be sorry when he gets back,"
comments Yellow Man, ending the minigame. First off, one of the things that made this minigame this hard to solve was how different it was from any other minigames we'd seen before. This one is extremely advanced compared to the other FNAF minigames with unique sound effects, multiple characters, dialogue, and more traits that the other more simplistic minigames simply didn't have. However, the biggest problem theorists faced when trying to solve this thing was the fact that we didn't even know who the people we met here were. While the wider consensus was that this yellow man is William Afton and that the people in his house are his family members, not everyone agreed. In fact, there was a significant percentage of people, myself included, that believed that what we were seeing here had no connection to the Aftons at all, or almost none. About 3 months ago, I put out a video talking about how I believe Midnight Motorist is about the family of one of the MCI victims, Gabriel, and that the green man outside Junior's is William Afton, the one who lured him out of his house and into the woods to then take him to Freddy Fazbear's and kill him there. This theory became my masterpiece for about 3 weeks, with FNAF theorist Ozone reacting to it before it was debunked, which I'll talk about soon. I won't bring up the evidence for that theory here, but if you're interested, I highly suggest checking out my original MM video after this one. Anyway, this was all fine and dandy until the demo for 5 Nights at Freddy's dropped during the anniversary week. While I should have been relaxing on vacation at that time, I soon came to the realization that this singular demo contained one singular piece of evidence that completely shattered my idea of Midnight Motorist. A tiny, brittle, yet damning yellow spring Bonnie antenna on the purple Midnight Motor car, clearly connecting it to Afton. This, paired with the description of the car, which was left in the files of the game, is pretty clearly showing us that this purple car is owned by William Afton and that he was the one that used it during Midnight Motorist. The evidence for Afton MM, as we theorists call it for short, was pretty good. The purple car is similar to the one we see in Take Cake to the Children from FNAF 2, where William kills Charlotte Emily, and we see tire tracks and security puppet FNAF 6's recreation of that minigame, and the name of Midnight Motorist in the files is Later That Night, which lines up neatly with the death of Charlie. The car is obviously purple, just like William, and the overall vibe of the driver is similar to what we know about William. And sure, 5 Labs might have confirmed Midnight Motorist is about William Afton and his family, but that only solved one of the endless debates from this minigame, as there were still countless others. What's the amount of dirt in the clearing? Who's the bouncer outside Junior's? What's up with the TV person? Who's the runaway? What are the animatronic footprints outside the house? Why is Afton's house in the middle of the woods, and where's Fredbear's family diner? The list goes on and on and on. So today, I want to create a new explanation for Midnight Motorist with the evidence and information we know now. So let's get right into it, and start off with the identity of the motorist, the runaway, and the TV person. We have very good reason to assume Mustard Man is William Afton, what with the 5 Pipes of Freddy's card, his behavior, his car, and so on, but we've been assuming it's him throughout this video anyways. The TV person is one of two people in my mind. If the runaway is Crying Child, this is Michael Afton. Mike is known for watching TV in sister location, and in FNAF 4 he hides behind the TV, more on this later. If the runaway is Mike, however, as I think it has to be one of these two, then the couch person is probably Mrs. Afton or someone separate from the Afton kids. So, who is the runaway? Where has he run off to, and what's up with the animatronic footprints? Well, I think I found definitive proof that the runaway in this minigame is the Crying Child. Before the big reveal, let's go over the already existing evidence for BV Runaway, as this theory is called. First off, we know Crying Child has rough days. A lot of them, so it would make sense that he particularly would have a bad day. He's also known for being in his room a lot and crying there, while Mike doesn't even have a room in FNAF 4. There's other evidence, but here's the nail in the coffin that I think definitively proves Crying Child is the runaway. A forgotten story from the Fazbear Frights anthology series, Hide and Seek. In the story, we meet Tony, a troubled teen who's always competing with his older brother Connor. Connor bullies Tony a lot, always bragging about how he's the best and Tony feels like he isn't worth anything. Connor is always hanging out with her dad, watching TV in the living room, and Tony often barricades himself in his room to be alone. Since his mom left the family for an unknown reason many years ago, he has no other parent to talk to. One day, while working his shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Tony finds out a new game has been installed, Hide and Seek, featuring a dark version of Bonnie, where your objective was to find him across his several hiding spots. No matter how much he tries or how much he cheats, Tony just can't win, and eventually he trashes the attraction and the shadow Bonnie in it. When he comes back home and looks in the mirror, he sees that there's a weirdly rabbit-like shadow looming over him. Over the next few days, he tries several ways to get rid of the shadow, even almost drowning himself in the process, until eventually his brother notices that something's up and acts concerned about Tony's well-being. Tony finally understands that the only way to get rid of Shadow Bonnie was by admitting his defeat, by doing the one thing he never wanted to do: give up. Tony goes to the broken arcade game and admits his defeat, and the shadow leaves. But even though Tony should be relieved, he isn't. His ego gets the better of him, and yet again he refuses to give up before driving himself and the shadow into a wall full of pegs and nails, slowly bleeding out and ending the story. If you're a bit confused about why I think this story is relevant to Midnight Motorist, let me explain. First off, you've got 3 main characters, 2 that watch TV and 1 that is a bit of a loner, locking himself up in his room. This story is almost definitively a narrative parallel to Midnight Motorist, with Mike, or Connor, the bullying older brother who likes to watch TV, Toby, the crying child, and their dad, William, living without the kid's mother in a house. That's not saying the story is purely meant to explain that minigame, just that the similarities are glaring. I didn't bring this up in my recap, but an element of the story that gets brought up time and time again throughout this novella that feels really important to me is the recliner in Toby's family's living room. This thing is mentioned at least 5 times, trust me, at least 5 times throughout the story, always placed in front of the TV, just like Midnight Motorist, which has a reclining couch positioned in front of a TV. So, with this in mind, how does this help us understand the story of Midnight Motorist? Well, first off, it makes it pretty clear the runaway is the Crying Child, and that the footprints outside the house are of a shadow animatronic of some sort, either Shadow Bonnie, like in the story, or Shadow Freddy. I actually think Shadow Bonnie carries over to Midnight Motorist. Notice the three-toed footprints and how they're perfectly lined up, there's only 2 of them after all. This is exactly like Shadow Bonnie in FNAF 2 and the later Ultimate Custom Night. He has the exact same foot shape and he doesn't move, and we know he often stays standing up in a rigid position. Shadow Bonnie haunting the Crying Child for some reason is beginning to make a lot of sense, but what other connections can we make between the two, and why is he haunting him? Well, to start off, Shadow Bonnie is often associated with darkness, agony, and remnant. We know from FNAF AR that he shows up if you collect too much dark remnant, which is similar to Crying Child in some way, as he also potentially has a lot of agony or remnant around him after he dies. In Ultimate Custom Night, Shadow Bonnie makes your screen go dark for 10 seconds, meaning you'll be unable to see anything during that time. In the survival logbook, Crying Child tells the altered text that he can't see. His head was crushed after the bite of 83 after all, meaning that he obviously can't see anymore. Interestingly enough, we do see shadow versions of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie during FNAF 4's minigames, and Spring Bonnie's the only thing in the room to keep moving after the bite of 83, singling him out from the rest of the scene. But I know the real reason why it's specifically Shadow Bonnie stalking Crying Child. Because of what he saw. It's a common debate in the Fierce community. What was it that the bite victim saw that made him so terrified of the animatronics? Personally, I think it was either an employee putting on a Springlock suit, or this empty suit in the back with what appears to be hair, a corpse, in it. But to be honest, it doesn't matter. because both of these things I just brought up are tied to a Spring Bonnie suit. One being someone putting on a Spring Bonnie suit, and the other being a corpse in what is very clearly a Spring Bonnie suit. Whichever one of these two options it is, it's still Bonnie. So, we've established a pretty good connection between Bite Victim and the hide-and-seek story, and thus Shadow Bonnie. But what does this mean for Midnight Motorist? Well, we've already got the identity of the footprints and the runway down, but what about the unmarked pile of dirt and the place the runaway ran off to? Well, I think that with all the Freddy stuff present in Hide and Seek, and with Toby ending the shadow at Freddy's, it makes sense for Crying Child to run off to a Fazbear location, either Freddy's or Fredbear's. I do believe Fredbear's is the more likely option. It is a bit weird that William refers to it as that place. It's a weird detail, but to be completely honest with you, I have no idea what to replace a Fazbear location with in this timeline. As for the dirt, the disappearance of the mom in the original story is extremely suspicious, and Toby's dad refuses to talk about it, which to me seems to hint at the fact that the amount of dirt in this clearing is where William buried Mrs. Afton after offing her. Nasty stuff. I'm pretty confident about this placement, so let's go over my interpretation of the Midnight Motorist minigame. I present to you, and yeah, name pending, Seek MM. Crying Child, Afton's youngest son, is terrified of the Springlock suits, particularly Spring Bonnie, after witnessing either a dead kid in one of the suits or someone putting on the suit, or both. A shadowy version of Shadow Bonnie attaches itself to Crying Child and begins stalking him, even appearing outside his window, coaxing him out. After the murder of Charlotte Emily, William comes home, and Crying Child tries to get rid of the shadow by running off to Freddy's, but it's likely he fails. This minigame also explains the fate of the elusive Mrs. Afton through the amount of dirt, and shows that Michael does actually care about his brother just like Connor in the original story, explaining his motivations to help Crying Child and go to the FNAF locations later on in the franchise. It's likely that after this particular incident, the Afton family move on to the location we see in FNAF 4 and its minigames, explaining why Crying Child is already scared of the characters when the minigames start. So with that, that's my interpretation of Midnight Motorist. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video and the fairly new ideas, but most importantly new evidence it introduced, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your feedback, and hey, if you didn't, do the same, but remember to be respectful if you do end up commenting. Most importantly, however, remember, keep on theorizing and never stop overthinking. This has been Woodard Circle, the Midnight Theorist.